Morning. My name is Christophe Lécureuil. I'm the Executive Director of the European Centre for Public Affairs, which is a non-profit think tank dedicated to promoting public affairs and excellence in public affairs. We're going to talk about this career in public affairs. So we've got a question from Tom, thanking you for your time and insights, and he's wondering whether the public affairs profession is shifting away from being purely direct government lobby, or whether you see a move to more indirect tactics like civil society engagement, stakeholder networking, advocacy, and so on. And does it mean that the skill sets, experience to remain competitive is different from that perspective?
Good question, and I'm perhaps not as in depth in the weeds of public affairs practice I used to be to answer that fully, but I would say, at least from the candidate specifications we get as headhunters, I think some of the classic skills are still there. I mean, at the end of the day, in Brussels or in member states, many of your contacts with policymakers are one-to-one. I think we're all adapting to this new environment of doing webinars and talking to policymakers, and I think I hear from practitioners, if you didn't have those contacts before, you're struggling, right? So I think lobbyists who have an existing network of senior relationships are particularly valued at this time, and I know in consultancy, for instance, that's a challenge for younger consultants. It's harder for them to establish new relationships. So I think it's a lot of the traditional rules still apply, but watch this space, because digital is inevitably changing the world around us very, very fast. I've been talking to a few CEOs who are clients, and they are talking about how in their own organizations there's going to be a lot of delayering, which is a rather sinister word for letting people go, right? Middle management, because they've realized that you can do a lot digitally. You don't need so many face-to-face meetings. Perhaps you don't need so many people. You can automate a lot of things. And so I think this whole question of how to integrate artificial intelligence, what processes you can automate in public affairs, are going to be very front of center. Also, as budgets are reduced, we'll be looking at ways for digital to save money and add value.
Thank you, Mark. I have a question myself, since you are a headhunter, and that it's probably people are asking questions, what exactly do you do? Do you have any advice on how to deal with the recruitment firms and people like you, either from the recruitment perspective, that is the Director General asking you to find people, or from the people who are looking for that job?
Are you looking for a job?
No.
Okay. No. Yes, good question. So I think that the answer to that really depends on your perspective, whether you're a candidate or you're a client. I think from a candidate's perspective, what I've understood since I became a headhunter is, that's my phone going, is that people sometimes think headhunters are career coaches, but we're not. Here we have two career coaches in front of us, Barbara and Catherine, who are well qualified to do that. We are paid for by organizations to find first-class candidates for specific roles. Our job is not to give career advice. Of course, when we sit down with people for coffee, we will give career advice, but that's not our job. That's not our mission. That's what Catherine and Barbara do. Secondly, I think candidates, you should consider headhunters as part of the interview process. So I'm an informal, I think a friendly guy, so you can talk to me in an informal, friendly way. Other headhunters can be more formal and quite picky, and they might be looking at your personality in a different way than I am. And I think Catherine's going to talk a little bit about adapting your style to your audience. So think about the personal style of the headhunter you're talking to. And as I say, I stress that we are part of the interview process. So if you send us typos in emails, one personal annoyance is when people take ages and ages to respond, because I don't think it's a good sign for how they might behave in a corporate or association environment. Those kinds of basic mistakes that you would hope not to make in a formal interview, don't make those with a headhunter, because we are judging. And at the end of the day, our job is to present the best candidates for the job, because we want them to do a first-class job and stay in the organizations that we recruit for. I think that's the last thing from a candidate perspective. I do think about LinkedIn. It's a very, very important tool, and it's important you don't have typos on your LinkedIn profile, for instance. There are way too many of those. Be careful about career gaps, etc. So do think about that as your CV to the world, because it's not just people like me, it's also in-house recruiters, and of course people in your social network who are looking at your LinkedIn profile. And when you do your CV, I would propose that you follow the basic logic of LinkedIn, which is you start chronologically with your career history and end in education and interests in that way. So that's from a candidate's perspective. From a client's perspective, I suppose, I got into this profession because, frankly, I saw the space for a specialist, more specialism here. And in the same way you wouldn't invite a odd job man to fix your gas heating, I think it's important, if you're going to hire a headhunter, hire a specialist. So ideally someone that understands the market, understands candidates, that understands the difference between a good lobbyist and a bad lobbyist.